Abby, if we could start with you. Birdsong is a book that's admired and adored, really, incredibly popular. How do you approach adapting something that's just so well known?
I think it's such an exquisite book, and so it's sort of terrifying. But I think what you fundamentally do is you sort of have to come to it completely new. And actually, I'm very lazy, so I really genuinely, I read it and I was like, hey, 600 pages, I did it. But and I mean that in the true sense that I love the book, but it's harrowing as a book to read. So I put the book down and then I jotted down everything I remembered in it, and that was really how I started. It's just almost just sort of thematically and emotionally, and just I think most good work is about what you leave out as much as what you put in. So for me, it was just trying to find the things that stayed with me, it's an exquisite book, but more than anything, it's a historical book, and I think with Harry Patch dying, one of the last soldiers, I felt this incredible sense that, and war is ongoing. I felt an incredible sense of wanting to carry that. That was the story for me. So that's really how.
And at what point did you decide to change the narrative structure? Because obviously in the book, we go 1910 Amiens, and then we go 1960, and we don't look back. Whereas it's different here.
I love the modern story in the book, but I think you're distilling all the time. So it became a much easier ask actually when we worked between the two time zones, and it's a book that I've been on for a long time. Initially as a feature film, so it was incredibly liberating to go from 90 minutes to 290 minutes, because I suddenly wasn't wrestling whether it was a war film or a love story. I felt I could have both, and so really that was.
I think the juxtaposition of those two storylines really unlocks the whole the energy of it. I think that somehow that means that you can go from, in effect, just two time zones going between the two stories. It felt that that was Abby's.
I think it's about the violence and a love affair and the kind of exquisite love and war. So for me, it was you're constantly batting and reflecting for me in those two worlds. The contradictions of those two very different places of emotions. So.
And trying to have, in a sense, the book is about the most extremes of the extremes of experience, the most extreme things that you can experience in life, and the intensity of love and the intensity of war, and somehow trying to find a way through those, but really everything in love and in war is 10 out of 10, and so it's that kind of clash between the two is really exciting.
From the point of view of the direction, does it make it more complicated having to always be thinking about going backwards and forwards?
Not really. No, it was. We shot in a way. We sort of knew it would. It will work, and it works sometimes kinetically, sometimes emotionally. Sometimes there's an energy level in the war story that continues in the love story. Sometimes with the love story, there's a level of intensity that somehow bounces back onto the war. So in the end, we kept in the writing and in the shooting and in the editing, we kept sort of it was very much a sort of almost a rhythmical thing, as much as sometimes as much as a narrative thing, trying to get the balance between those two, trying to see how much bad stuff you could absorb before needing the love story, how much love story you could. All of those were sort of judgment calls, I think.
And Clemence, can you say what intrigued you about Isabel? What attracted you to the role?
Her, is that working? Her mystery, I think. I find that what I've loved about making films is that sometimes you can talk about the mystery we're all to one another, really, in life, and how. And that love story or passion story or affair for me was very much about how you can feel like you know someone completely and actually not know him at all. And it was really strange to start talking with quite young girls about that book and how they've been completely marked by that character and by that story that could be a very classical happy ending love story and turns out to be quite different. And everyone had their opinion about why Isabel was Isabel and did what she did. It was quite nice to decide that I could keep it as my secret.
How about you, Joseph? The sewer rats, as they're known, it's not a typical war story. People think of infantrymen. Their experience was very different. Can you tell me what you learned about them in the course of your research?
I think you just obviously discover a new world underneath the ground. You know, weirdly enough, there was only one Victoria Cross given to a tunneler, and that was a man called William Hackett, who actually, I understand, Sebastian Forbes had based my character Jack on, who basically had stayed behind to help some men who had been trapped in a tunnel. And having got 3 of the men out, one of them was so badly injured that he decided to stay with him and keep him company until they could get him out of the bigger hole, basically. And during that time, it collapsed and he died. So he got his posthumous Victoria Cross. But I think Philip and I talked a lot about the tunnelers being sort of almost kind of special forces, but at the same time they were civilian men doing their civilian job. Unlike the infantry who were coming in being trained, these men had already trained as miners, whether they had been working in the mines up in the north, or whether they'd been working, as Jack's character had, on the central line, building the tubes in London. These guys were the guys who created the modern transport system. And death was imminent for them in their normal daily lives. So the fact that they were zen-like in their quality at times comes from that sense that they're already used to that sense. And weirdly, William Hackett had an accident where he could have died and he didn't call his wife. And there's a little nod to that. I talked to makeup people and said I'd really like there to be a scar. And when we got the washing machine on Jack's back, just to acknowledge that we were aware of who it was, we were kind of, I just wanted a little sense of honoring him.
But in terms of filming in tunnels, the effect is immensely claustrophobic. How did you film this scene?
We filmed in a studio, and we had a whole lot of different bits and pieces of tunnels and shafts, and then I wanted to try to connect it seamlessly to the upstairs bit, to the set, to the actual trenches set, and so we just filmed in little tunnel sections, and our tunnels were based on the original tunnels. I think Joseph went down.
Went down a genuine tunnel which they just uncovered in Ludlow, and it was just extraordinary going down it. I mean, in part because this is the story we're really telling. In part because the lead tunneler in that particular tunnel had the name George Moore, spelled M-A-U-L-E, which actually doesn't actually, turns out he's not a relation in any way, shape or form, but nonetheless the surname did used to be M-A-U-L-E, is now M-A-U-L-E, and so there was kind of this sense of almost trying to get, I think, for us to get permission, anyway, to tell the story. And I think, again, Sebastian in his introduction in Birdsong talks about wanting permission to, in a sense, be able to comprehend and be able to allow themselves to explore this matter that really none of us, we haven't got anybody living now who can tell us about it other than what's recorded. So it's sort of, it's important to go down and try and experience it as much as possible. But it's beautiful. I mean, in chalk, when the light's on, it's blinding white down there. You can hear you can hear a pin drop. So the fact that these people are having to remain absolutely silent, and if they hear, other tunnels working, to then go silent. So you've got this game of cat and mouse constantly going on, planting camouflage, which are little explosions along it. And the ultimate idea being is that you trap the tunnelers. So you bury people alive, that's the game. In a funny kind of sense underneath, that you're blowing off here. You've got men who've been in trouble back here, and you blow them here, and they're stuck in the middle. And that's it's a
chalk and white. Yeah.
There you go. Where you tell that.
Yeah.
You mentioned Sebastian. Perhaps, Philip, can you say what his involvement was in this, if anything?
Well, immense in a way, in the sense that we all carried our battered copies of Birdsong around, and I think they were incredible resource for all of us, actors as much as anybody. And Sebastian involved in gave us notes on the script and came out on location, saw us shooting, and seen. As soon as I finish the second episode, you'll see that, seen the first one, and really likes it. So he's been there throughout, and it's been really a useful, amazing.
Do you have his letter?
We do, yeah.
Abby, I was wondering, in terms of, there's already been a couple of First World War dramas that have war wars out at the moment. Downton Abbey did some trench scenes last year. What sort of wartime cliches were you aware of and looking to avoid?
I love Blackadder. I just don't think you can ever top that moment. So, I mean, cliches that, we speak in cliches, you have to go constantly censoring yourself. I mean, I think, I really enjoyed watching it today, and I don't often say that about my work, and I think part of it is because, my job was just literally to sort of shape and pull back and pull back and pull back, so that the dialogue is very spare, and I think part of that is that I wanted, and I think what Philip has realised so brilliantly is that through the visual storytelling is you want one's mind to travel as the book makes you travel. It allows you to breathe in a scene. It allows you to go into that world, and so I think I'd love to come up with something really witty here and say, I think there's always just things of saying Lieutenant Commander Sir, kicking your heels and marching out. There's people drinking whiskey, and we've seen those images, but I think it's a tribute to Eddie's, amazing performance, and equally to, Joseph, who brings, such tenderness to that part. You don't realise it. It's like watching a balloon inflate. You have no idea how the picture's going to be until it's inflated, and so, and then, just that exquisite thing that Clarence does. So, for me, I'm at home acting it out in my bedroom, and suddenly we've got those people doing it, and taking it beyond that. But I hope that irons that cliche, and I think when you have a director like Philip, then he's watching that very carefully. So, but to be honest, the book is really central, and I think when we first talked, that one of the key elements, and I think is everything that's been going on in Iraq and Helmand and Afghanistan, and those images still stay very true to me, and war's not a cliche, it's real, and so I hope that Birdsong, certainly the book does that, and I believe that the television will do that as well, without any cliches.
In the first episode, Isabel is probably the character, things happen to her, but she's not engaged in the action, for example, in the way that Firebrace is. Can you say a little bit about how she evolves without giving away everything about the second episode? Because she does.
That's impossible.
She does a lot of tunneling in the second episode.
Very bright chalk.
Chalk tunnel.
Yeah. This is why I dressed as soldier.
Yeah.
Pretend. I think she just discovers sex, probably, and the freedom that comes with it, and the feeling of maybe, being who you really are, or you were meant to be. There's a sentence in the book where she says that I was born to live this moment, and she discovers the danger that comes with that. She probably just becomes who she was supposed to be, and wasn't allowed to be until then.
Because she's in this weird position where she's been almost forced to grow up without having any adolescence. She's straight into the role.
I think the adolescence
Classical
thing
Roman.
is quite a recent thing. I'm not even sure. Half of the tunnelers are adolescents, and they probably don't get a chance to grow up being teenagers. But I think she's very sad. She's very sad it's not what you have to be. But yeah, is that a really
No,
question?
you've answered it amply. I imagine this is perhaps an Abby or a Philip question. In terms of authenticity, and as I'm sure you're well aware, people, your historians, will jump on anything that they see being slightly out of place. Was it indeed the aim here to make it scrupulously authentic?
I think so. In some ways, what Abby was saying about Sebastian's book is that somehow a lot of its power comes from the detail and the realism and the sort of the unusual story of tunneling, and so we wanted to try to make all of that be real, and we had all the technical advisors and so on, just so that it our uniforms were, we got Imperial War Museum special costume person from there, or their costume curator, and we made all of our uniforms to their spec in Poland, and sort of all of those sort of things were all of that detail, I think, is important in the sense that I think you want to somehow feel that you are doing it right, but also somehow doing it new, discovering it in a new way. For a director, a really scary thing about the First World War is once you put everybody in those clothes and they're in the trench, suddenly it looks like another film and it's not your film. And I think that in some ways the authenticity thing is more a way that you can find your way into the story. And there's a great 1916 film, Battle of the Somme, shot there during it, and that was something that I watched a lot. And suddenly you're seeing the horses moving and they're kicking up dust, and everyone's covered in chalk, and suddenly you realise this whole kind of wet, muddy, sort of wet, rainy kind of version of the First World War is just one version of it. And I think that it's a battlefront that was hundreds of miles long, and with all sorts of different people in it. So in a way, often experts will come to you and say, it wasn't like this, it was like this. But in fact, you have to do the work, you have to get into it, and then you find the little jewel. And in our case, it felt like it was a drier, hotter, dustier world, a more forbidding place than in some ways, or a different kind of world to the one that we've seen. And that came out of that process of research. But in the end, it's those details. You try to get them all right, but in a way, the truth of it, I hope, comes from something more than just getting the right badge and so on. So that's the right, which is all right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, why don't we throw it open to the floor now? And I believe there are microphones roving. So if you'd like to put your hand up, and there's a lady down here.
Yes, a question for Abby. You're a brilliant writer of original drama, as we know. What are the differences in approaching something that's already written, a book that's hugely well known in the public arena, and approaching that and, it's something you do originally? Do you have a preference for one, and how do you approach each differently?
That's a really good question. I think it's a couple of things really. I think you fall in love with the book. So actually it's not that I would prefer one more than the other. It's just what you fall in love, why you feel you're writing, what you fall in love with. But actually they're different and they're not. I mean, you're basically, there are so many versions that one could have done for this book. And I've just chosen our version, and I just approach it like I think, what's the story I want to tell, and what was the story that I felt I responded to in the book. So, and I also slightly block out the white noise a bit. I don't Google too much and I don't read too much, and I'm quite ill-read. So in a way it was easy for me because I didn't have a huge context for amazing. I hadn't read all the classics, so I just sort of knew that this book has an amazing buzz, but I enjoyed it for myself really, and so I sort of already answered it. I'm sorry it's not more interesting, but ultimately I think that atmosphere.
the
I mean,
atmosphere and the
it's-
intensity and.
I love it when if you're asked to adapt something, or often you're asked to read books, to consider adapting it. It's about what I'm left with at the end. You know, it's the atmosphere I'm left with at the end, and I feel that for me is the most important thing of what. It's often not what the film is. It's not often what the book's been about. It's actually how has it moved me? Has it changed how I feel about the world? Has it changed the way I view something? Is it important? And actually, that's the best barometer. So sometimes it's important to tell an original story, and sometimes it's important to make a book because you want it to have another life on top of the brilliant life it's had already.
I have a quick Philistine addendum to that, which is it actually easier when you've got a book? Can you nick chunks of dialogue and go, brilliant, I can have a book up and see that?
Yeah, and to be honest, often, God, there's so much brilliant stuff in this that I was listening to it thinking, why did I put that line in? And but actually, it doesn't often work if you do that. You have it's a bit like you go out for you're going out with a great group of friends, or you've had a great evening, and the next day you maybe discuss it with your partner, and it's amazing how you have different opinions of that conversation, but it's also what are you left with? What were the key and the rest doesn't really matter. It's what you were left with, and it is so that's kind of sometimes it's easier. Sometimes I've adapted books where I've made huge mistakes, and I've kicked myself as I've watched them because I strayed too far from the narrative, for example, and so there have been moments like that where I thought, well, I'll never do an adaptation again. Hopefully not.
It's quite modest, isn't she?
There's gentlemen right at the back there.
Hello, a question for Philip and for Abby. Really. You mentioned Afghanistan and Iraq, and obviously in the 2 decades since Birdsong came out, there's been a lot's changed in the world in terms of the politics, but also in the TV world, there have been some, a golden age of television drama as well. Could you tell us a bit about how this is a Birdsong for 2012 and how it maybe is different from the film that might have got made if it had been made nearer the time that the book came out?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, one of the things, just from my side, as I was starting to direct it, you realise that because the First World War is so long ago, that the only way that people access it is through art, or the only way that we can access it is through other people's art, through films or through poetry or whatever, and that always is a lens, a very interesting lens sometimes, but somehow says as much about the moment when that work happened. So something like Oh What a Lovely War, or whatever those very famous First World War dramas are all somehow slightly political works often. And for this, I guess, one of the things that we wanted to do, I think, was to try to understand the nature of soldiering and to try to represent that accurately. And one of the films that we all watched was Restrepo, which was Academy Award nominated last year, and just an amazing film about life in Afghanistan, and it gave us a really interesting take on soldiering, in the sense that often First World War soldiers are portrayed as beautiful, doomed youth rather than just soldiers, and so I think that in some ways we try to depoliticize it in that way, if that's the right way. And in some ways, Sebastian's book, I think, is one of the first book, is the start of a wave of reassessing the First World War and not seeing it in terms of these traditional, maybe Oh What a Lovely War type class struggle, but just to see it as a group of men, as a group of soldiers in a situation, trying to make sense of the situation and trying to make sense of their lives. And so I suppose if there is a kind of modernity to it, it's from that, if that is anyway answering your question.
I was going to say that I think, I 98 I think when the book came out, so I don't feel that it's that far away, but I think also that one of the things that I think is key about it being, like the 21st century take is the sex, actually. I think there's a kind of rawness and an openness to the way the sex is portrayed in this, and I think you can show the violence of war, and it's been shown, but actually I think to give the same level of intensity to the sex, I think you know, I don't know whether I would have been able to write that 30 years ago, you know, to be able, or for that to be able to be portrayed in the way that it is. So.
What did it work? I thought that in terms of being a 2012 Birdsong, some of the footage in the tunnels, in the trenches, had that same feel that have seen in the sort of helmet cams in the alleyways of Kandahar. That same thing of being up close and something could happen. Anyway, doesn't matter. I think who's this lady down here?
Just pick up on what you said earlier, Abby, about acting the scenes out yourself. I just think that's a brilliant image because the projects you work on are so varied. If you could talk a bit more about that, and also you worked on recently the Iron Lady, Shane, The Hour. And where do Birdsong really fit in? And how do you focus maybe just on one project, or is it just, do you even sleep? I don't know.
God, I don't know. Okay. Well, you trapped me, Shane. That's fine. Maybe not so much. I think actually it's about the alchemy of the people I work with. It's really simple. I know it sounds like kind of gushy cliche, but I think, you know, the enthusiasm and the excitement for me working with actors. I'm an incredibly bad actress, so, you know, when I say actor, I literally just sit at my desk and go, oh. You know. but I'm excited to work with actors, and I see performances again. You know, I was watching again, I was thinking, I've got to work with this, I've got to work with this, how can I work with that? So that's a big thing for me. It's about directors. I get excited about working about directors. It's about paychecks. That's always helps, isn't it? You know? But it's normally about someone ringing up saying, "Is it there yet?" And actually, you know, a people pleaser. If you've got that, you know, use it to your advantage and go, "Yes, it's there. I'm on the last act," and in fact, you're not on the last act. You're wandering around the supermarket. So, you know, I just that's the way I do it, and I think I'm lucky. You know, I grab my chance, and because there are many brilliant writers behind me who I've admired. And I'm, you know, my time is, I grab this moment because I'll be gone, and there's an amazing new generation snapping at my heels. So I feel lucky, but it's my, you know, I'm having this moment, but, you know, next year, I've seen the other writers and they're very good. So,
gentleman over there.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to have seen that film in a cinema on a large screen. I think it will inevitably be a little diminished being watched on TV. Don't you think we're reaching a point where perhaps a pre-release on the cinema, not necessarily of a 3-hour single showing, but of a coordinated release of 2 separate films with the excitement that you get with watching a series on TV, if it was properly managed, properly coordinated, properly organised, not only would we be seeing the film in its best possible form, but also perhaps generating, to some degree, an additional market for this kind of film.
Who wants to field that one?
I love television. I love the intimacy of it. I love the fact that it could be somebody watching it in front of their computer, you know, with someone they love or on their own. So, you know, it's wonderful. Of course, it's wonderful seeing it on the big screen. And God, you know, if someone wants to show it for a couple of weeks, that would be fantastic. But ultimately, I love telly, and so I don't feel it's you know, I don't feel it's a diminishment. I think, you know, there are visuals that you want to see on a widescreen. There's performances that I think hold up in this piece, but actually, there's a quiet kind of political. I mean, that sort of socially, emotionally as well that happens in television, which I advocate. So I'm happy. It's for me. It's on television. I can live with that. I don't know what you feel.
I agree.
Lady here in the middle.
Can I just ask Joseph how much of a sense of what it would really have been like to have been in the tunnels? Because it looks absolutely terrifying. And I just wondered how much of that was brilliant acting and how much of that was because actually it is really genuinely terrifying. I mean,
unfortunately, it's not very terrifying.
It's brilliant acting.
And rather unfortunately, all the other guys were a bit bigger and braver than I was, and they sweat a lot more than I did. And in the book, they're always talking about how these guys are covered in wasn't very terrifying, but obviously we put ourselves in the moment and try and create that atmosphere inside ourselves and keep reminding ourselves of the story of the real men, of who we're doing this on art and the situation that we're in. To not make it historical, to not make it political, just to make it people dealing with a really extraordinary set of circumstances.
Is there anyone else? Yes, just there.
Yeah, hi. As the introduction, it was described as a very painterly film, and I think certainly to come across that way, the beautiful colours and composition. I'm interested to know what the kind of sources of inspiration for the composition of that film was, and how much of that, if any, came from the book.
A lot came from the book. For me, there was an exhibition at the V&A called The Cult of Beauty, which I really loved, and and so for the whole, it sounds like you're really enjoying it. So there was that. There is that sense prior to the First World War of a kind of looking back at the whole of culture and myths and art and classicism and all of that sort of thing, all wrapped up in this kind of aesthetic movement. And so we tried to make the French side of the story really kind of, I suppose, embody all of the world of civilization in some ways that was going to be destroyed by this war. And then for the war stuff, a lot of Restrepo, there's a great book of big portraits, a beautiful book of portraits called Hellman, which just were really up-close pictures of soldiers today that were really influential in the war story. And I wanted to make the whole thing as, we had to film it fast, but I wanted to make it beautiful and somehow to take you through the war in an aesthetic, with an aesthetic that somehow that somehow gave it a controlling intelligence to it, a controlling sense to it, and not to be cutty, not to be. Although I really love that kind of filmmaking, a documentary filmmaking. I come from documentaries, but I didn't want to do a sort of cutty, handy-heldy sort of thing. I just wanted to make it feel very simple and beautiful, and in some ways let the story come through with that.
Is there any? Yes, down here. Hold on 1 second, microphone comes.
In the novel, it's Jack Firebrace who's the artist who draws. What made you give that trait to Stephen instead?
I can't draw.
It's a last-minute rewrite.
So you've got to remember I started this a long time ago. So I thought to be a good answer. I think actually because it was an opening image and I wanted it on Stephen, and I just felt there was a whole world I needed to access that, in the past. And actually, in the book, there's an amazing book with, there's a book of codes and this sort of, and that was very complex to translate onto screen. And so the notion of the sketching became a much more easier way to access Stephen's past, his backstory, Isabel. So basically that's why.
And also to try to make him active in some ways, because he's a literary character in the book. Obviously, he does a lot of observing, and the narrative runs through him. But when you translate that into a filming situation, he's just watching stuff, and so in a way, the drawing was a way of Abby kind of drawing him into the scene, making him a participant in it, and in some ways seeing his mind. Because I think that's the other thing when you do a literary adaptation. A book has got lots of stuff going on in people's heads, and somehow that's the challenge for filmmaking, is to try to get it out of people's heads and onto the screen. So, and the drawing, I think, was a really good way of doing it.
And a sense of him trying to hold on to memory.
Yes,
slipping from him.
exactly.
So which felt very true to the writing of the film. You feel like this time slipping away.
Still does his carving.
Yeah, he does his carving. And then there was a lot of he's a creative man.
Yeah.
He's a photograph guy. Not a life.
Carving, you can't really see what he's done with it. Anyone else? Yes, the lady in the middle there.
more films that you watch for inspiration. I presume some of my favourites like Powers of Glory as well. I'm just wondering, I'm thinking Robert Graves wrote Goodbye to All That, the original memoirs, and it seems to me I've read something by Henry Williams, the Tagliata guy. Just wondering which actual memoirs and people who were actually there might have inspired you, or if you all had a favourite book you were all reading, or where you found your facts about the sappers and so on.
There's a fantastic biography of Siegfried Sassoon that came out not that long ago, and in a way that made use of a lot of his which had previously unpublished diaries, and it's a big book, and that was really great. The book itself, I have to say, Sebastian's book is in some ways enough in a way. There's so much there, there's so much detail there, and in some ways his ambition to mix fiction and fact and have this very rich, satisfying mixture of that, I think was a lot. But for me, the Siegfried Sassoon book was a great one. But as I was saying before, it's tricky because everybody often looks at it looks at it from their moment in time, looks back at it, and I think we were all really trying to get our characters to move forward into the story, not to feel that you were looking at people who were somehow looking backwards or had a sense of their own doomed destiny, but were just people who were alive and moving forward into life and not expecting to die. And so that was really that was really, I don't know, how are you? Joseph, you probably
the field was the big by Peter Barton, which was the sort of the manual to all the tunnelers, which again is a bit like Some Voices, what the BBC did, which I watch endlessly. But it's amazing the different people's experiences from the war. Obviously, I was surprised to find how many people actually enjoyed it. You know what I mean? Shocked. And we, when we were filming it, we had this great group of guys doing this thing together, and there was a real sense of camaraderie, a real sense of purpose. And I think that's something that the youth of today is. I'm not saying we need a war, but I'm saying we're missing that sense of having a unity and a real sense of moving forward together. So that kind of that feeling came through very much, and very much between all of us, the sort of the main cast who were just we were all there for just fighting our way through this wonderful script and all really caring about it. And we were lads. A lot of the time we had lads nights out. Yes, we did. And so did they. And I think it's important that we have that experience as well.
The results are certainly there for all to see. I'd like to say thank you very much to Clement Poesie, Abby Morgan, Joseph Moore,